Thanks everyone. So this is a joint project between JUNA and FAME, the Foundation for Australia's Most Endangered Species, and it's running in the Flinders Ranges in the north of the state. And for those that don't know what an Idnia and Velda are, the Idnia is the western quoll and the Velda is the brushtail possum, and that's in Adnyamatna language. So first of all, just a bit of a background about semi-arid zone reintroductions outside of fences, and there's a litany of failures, unfortunately. So just about all the critical weight range mammals that have been reintroduced into the arid zone have failed. So one of the reasons that the western quoll and the brushtail possum were chosen for this reintroduction is that there's been some success with them in Western Australia, and they're also thought to be a little bit more tolerant to cat and fox predation. What is an Idnia? Those from Western Australia will know them as chuditch. They're a nocturnal carnivorous marsupial, opportunistic forager, live short-lived, large home ranges, pretty well eat whatever they can fit in their mouth. This is where they used to be distributed, in the green. They're now only found in the blue, in the very southwest of Western Australia. The Western Australians have reintroduced them to a number of sites quite successfully, and that was part of the impetus for trying them in South Australia as well. So as you can see, they're completely extinct in South Australia. The Ikara-Flinders Ranges National Park is a large conservation reserve now jointly managed, and one of the reasons the reintroduction could take place is because there's been a bounce back program running there for 20 years, which was implemented by JUNA, and that's a lot of fox, goat, rabbit and weed control, and in particular the fox control has been very, very successful. So we conducted a wild-to-wild release from Western Australia to South Australia. The colleagues at Deepore collected the quolls and we flew them across in the JUNA plane, and they were released directly into the Flinders Ranges National Park. The reintroduction started in 2014. We had 41 reintroduced then, 37 last year, and we're due to release up to 15 in the next month, and that'll be the last of the 3 translocations into the park. This one here is living under a rock slab, and they don't usually come out during the day, but during the breeding season they can do some silly things. When the quolls arrived in South Australia, we had a large welcome to country ceremony. It was the first time that some of the Adnyamatna people had seen a quoll, and they had dreaming stories about the quoll, that it was quite important to them as a totem animal. So there was a very emotional ceremony at the Flinders Ranges National Park when the quolls arrived. We had a big smoking ceremony and there was lots of excitement. So it was a great release event. All of the quolls we've released have been radio collared, and anyone familiar with the Flinders will realise it's quite tough terrain to radio tracking. So we did have a plane with fixed mounted antennas for some of it, but we did a lot of climbing hills. That's Tina Schroeder there climbing the Hyson Range looking for quolls. We also set 3 transects of camera traps throughout the area so we could monitor the population of the predators as well as the quolls. This one here's got a collar on it, so we had a PhD student, Mel Jensen, who could identify them individually from their spot patterns, so we could work out exactly who was where. We also did some trapping, and we're doing twice annual trapping just to look at breeding and condition and survival and things like that. So we have a big team that goes up twice a year and sets traps for the quolls. So far we've detected over 600 shelter sites, and they're very flexible in their shelter sites. So more than half of them have been rabbit warrens, but we've also had them under rock ledges, in hollow logs, pretty well anywhere they can squeeze themselves into. Very exciting, we got our first pouch young only a couple of months after release, and we've had all of the females with pouch young and all breeding at pretty well maximum rate, which is about 6 pouch young. Sometimes they have 7, but mostly 6. So we've been very impressed with the fact they got straight into it, and within a couple of months out came all the pouch young. So this is the pouch young just before they're about to be denned. They're still unfurred and they can't regulate their temperature at this point. The spots have just started to appear. You can see some fur on the head there. They will be put in a den at 2 months of age, and then at about 5.5 months they'll disperse. So we've been trapping females with various stages of pouch young throughout the project. Once they get furred and they start to get a little bit bolder, they tend to be moved down from hollow logs or trees down onto the ground, and they'll come out to the entrance of the burrows and start to forage around and and start to eat insects and invertebrates and things like that. So this is some young at the burrow entrance that are just about to start dispersing. There's the mum with the collar, and the young are trying to climb on her back still, even though they're way too big, and then they're following her off for a night of hunting. So quite vulnerable at that stage, and we were quite interested to see how they would go. So we did attach some drop-off collars to a whole lot of juvenile Idnia, and we could see them dispersing throughout the park. This is the Flinders, the Wilpena Pound area of the park. So we had good dispersal, good survival of the juveniles, which was really, really impressive. We're pretty happy with that. So the good news is that the Idnia are breeding at pretty well full capacity. We're getting juveniles surviving and dispersing. Seems to be good for shelter and food. Hardly detecting a fox on camera. I think we've had 2 detections in 18 months. Trap success is increasing. So we've got new animals at F1 and F2 generation in the population, and our camera trap detections are pretty stable. So these are our 3 camera grids, and you can see a spike there. That was when we did the second release, and there was lots of quolls running around and getting picked up on camera before they settled down. But in general, the camera detections are going pretty well at this point. It's early days. The bad news, it's always bad news in reintroductions. 1/3 of each of our release group has been killed by cats in the first few months. So our main predator and our main problem at the moment is feral cats. They're not killing all of the Idnia, but they're certainly picking off quite a lot of them. And we're quite interested in that because this is quite an aggressive little animal. You can see here that they've got quite large teeth, and they can get quite stroppy. So we were quite big teeth. So we were quite interested to see sort of what sort of cats were actually capable of killing these little feisty little creatures. So we did a DNA study where we would swab all of the carcasses that we found for DNA, and then we would trap up a whole lot of cats in the background population, and we were trying to match the DNA from the carcasses to the individuals by genotyping the DNA. And after a lot of work and a long process, we were able to identify who was actually doing the killing of the quolls. So you can see that the females are in black and the males are in grey, and that's the background histogram of weights. But the cats that were actually killing the quolls were really the large males. So we didn't have any females killing quolls. They were large male cats, and they were also killing multiple quolls. So we label these catastrophic killers in the population. So even though we had a large population of cats, really we're only looking at about 10% of that population that were doing all the damage. And these tended to be large male cats. They were definitely repeat offenders, killing up to 3 or 4 quolls in quick succession when they found a quoll. They were very hard to trap, and they really required targeted control. So this is one of them there. He was called White Tip. He had a white tip on his tail, and he was dispatched by a professional hunter. So we have implemented a trapping and shooting program for feral cats in the Flinders Ranges. And really what we're looking at is integrated cat control at strategic times. So we have removed 174 cats. We do eradicat baiting, we do monthly trapping, and we have a sporting shooters team that comes in as well. And you can see from the method that the larger cats are tending to be taken out by shooting and leg holds. So that's one of the reasons it's important not to rely on one technique. You really want to spread your effort. And so this one here, if I just show you here, there's a poison bait just there. And this is one cat that's just walked past it. And here comes a second cat that sniffs it, and then very quickly a quoll comes along and eats it. Now these guys are very tolerant to 1080, so the quoll's fine. We haven't had any issues with any deaths from 1080 for quolls. But it does mean that putting baits out, you have to be really strategic about the timing that you do that. So it's very hard to control these feral cats. Just quickly, I'm going to touch on the brushtail possum reintroduction. Hannah's talking next and give you a bit more detail about that. People always say to me, why are you reintroducing brushtail possums? You know, we've got them in our backyard, you can have the one on my rose bush and all this sort of stuff. But actually possums are extinct in the South Australian arid zone, and they're really struggling in the northern areas. So really the most northerly population is now corn, and that's not doing so well either. So anywhere where there's foxes or land clearance or competition, they don't do so well. So we did move 79 possums last year from Yucamara Sanctuary. They were more than happy for us to take possums from their sanctuary. And we did again a wild to wild release straight into the Flinders. One thing we did is we removed females with very small pouch young, and that meant that because all the females retained that young, we basically had new individuals coming through within 6 months of the release. So we managed to double our population, well, not double, but we managed to increase our population very quickly by doing so. And that seemed to be a good strategy for possums. As long as the pouch young were small and unfurred, they tended to hold on to them. So we've now got F1 individuals with F2 pouch young. They're doing really well in the Flinders. Mostly hanging out in the river red gum creek lines and hanging out in the river red gum hollows, but we're also getting them in cracks in native pines and things like that as well. We've had GPS collars on 7 of them, females not moving very far, really sticking to that eucalypt creek line sort of river red gum habitat, and the males with their promiscuous mating system moving around everywhere and accessing as many females as they possibly can. Mortalities have been a lot lower, so the possums have done a lot better than the quolls in terms of predation. I think a cat taking on a possum is probably a bigger ask than taking on a quoll. So we've had high adult survival, slightly lower juvenile survival. We have had some taken by cats, maybe bird of prey, heat stress, a bit hard to tell sometimes. And we have had a recent spike in predation of possums, and we think this is related to this decline in rabbit abundance that we've seen just recently in the park. So as the rabbit numbers go down, the predators are hungrier. So in summary, it's been nearly 2 years since the first release. The reintroductions are progressing well, but the long-term success is going to depend on maintaining fox control and implementing cat control at key times. Thank you.